Hi there. Aviation is one of the safest modes of transport. Even when the control system fails, the engines fail, or the chassis is not released, the passengers on board still have a considerable chance of successfully landing on the ground. In extreme situations, an inexhaustible human mind comes to the rescue, able to quickly find the right solution. Today, we will look at 10 incredible landings of passenger aircrafts that have taken normal everyday pilots and made them brave pilots that have gone down in the history of aviation. In the summer of 1982, a Boeing 747 was scheduled to fly on the London-Oakland route with stops in India, Indonesia, and Melbourne. As soon as the flight left the airport in Kuala Lumpur, the plane flew over the suddenly revived Indonesian volcano, flying in the clouds of the volcanic ash. All 4 engines of the aircraft died out. Small abrasive particles of ash flew into the turbine, also damaging the fuselage. As the windows in the cockpit sparkled, the pilot gave the command to fasten your seatbelts. The entire airliner was engulfed in a flickering white glow, and the passengers were horrified to observe the flaming engines. The cabin was filled with smoke and a choking smell of sulfur. The only solution in this situation would be an emergency landing of the aircraft on the surface of the Indian Ocean. But when they reached an altitude of about 13,000 feet, the 4th engine managed to kick back on, and the others worked behind it, thanks to the flight engineer and co-pilot. Despite the problem with the windshield, which was completely cloudy from scratches of abrasive particles, the British crew managed to safely land the plane at Jakarta Airport. Of the 248 passengers and 15 crew members on this flight, not a single person was injured. Flight 1248 was from Baltimore to Chicago, and then to Las Vegas. When landing in a blizzard, the plane slid off the runway at Chicago Midway Airport and crashed into cars. The blizzard reduced visibility to less than 1 mile. It was less than necessary for a minimum landing. The crew could linger in the air, expecting better weather, but it decided to land the plane on the ground halfway, despite adverse conditions. The Boeing 737 skid while landing. Subsequently, the bow collapsed and the plane crashed into the barrier wall surrounding the airport and stopped on the Central Avenue in the northwest corner of the airport. There were a lot of cars at the intersection and the plane knocked down 3 cars, as a result of which 12 people were taken to the hospital. Aircraft BAC 111, Flight 5390, took off from Birmingham Airport and headed for sunny Spain. Raising the plane into the air, the co-pilot transferred control to the commander. The plane was at an altitude of over 16,000 feet. The commander loosened his seatbelt here and then heard a crash. The windshield from the commander's side flew off in an unknown direction, and behind it was the commander. His legs were stuck in the cockpit, but he himself was nailed down by the wind to the aircraft body on the outside. The flight attendant grabbed the commander with both hands, preventing him from flying out of the window. The co-pilot began an emergency descent and transmitted a distress signal. The crew no longer believed that the commander was alive, but if they let go of him, it seemed as though the lifeless body would be even more dangerous, as it could be sucked up into the engine and disable the aircraft. So they flew to the nearest airport. With frostbite and broken hands, the commander was still alive and was able to be removed from the plane. The flight attendant who heroically kept him while flying had also been frostbitten in the face. The remaining crew members and passengers were not injured. The passengers and crew can owe their extreme adventure to the mechanic. He screwed the glass with bolts of a smaller diameter. In September 2010, the Tu-154 aircraft flying from Yakutia to Moscow landed in the Siberian wilderness. Having flown after taking off for 3.5 hours, the aircraft suddenly lost power, which caused the fuel pumps to stop, the onboard devices turned off, and the ability to control the wing elements was lost. In the fuselage was a combustible tank with 3.3 tons of operational reserves of kerosene, but this would be enough only for half an hour of flight. Pilots lowered the liner to about 10,000 feet to visually look for a suitable landing site. They checked their horizontalness by a glass of water. They were fortunate enough to notice a short 4,500-foot concrete strip of a small airport. but the Tu-154 needed twice as long to land. The matter was complicated by the fact that the pilots could not release the flaps. So when landing at 60 miles per hour, this exceeded the estimated speed. The pilots managed to land the plane at 3 points, but then a poorly controlled plane rolled out into a low spruce tree, located 500 feet beyond the end of the concrete strip. Fortunately, none of the passengers and crew were injured. On the spot, the aircraft was repaired on its own, and then it was able to fly for a detailed inspection. A plane flying from Tallinn to Moscow reported to the ground that after taking off, the nose landing gear was stuck in a half-retracted position. The plane would have to land on its belly at the nearest airport, where it would be possible to create such a trick, and that airport was Pulkovo Airport, where the plane was sent. Having flown up to the airport, the plane began to circle above it, producing fuel, and in order to speed up the process, it did it at an altitude of 1,600 feet. At the same time, the crew did their best to unlock the chassis with a metal pole. Carried away by this matter, the crew did not notice how the left engine stopped due to lack of fuel. The first and second pilots rushed to the helms, instantly received permission to fly over the city, and headed straight for the runway. Then the second engine froze, but there was not even a reserve of altitude to leave the city. Then the crew commander made the only possible decision: to put the emergency side on the water surface of the river. Over one bridge, the plane flew at an altitude of 300 feet. Over the second one, it had dropped to 100 feet. And with just a few feet to spare, it flew over the third bridge under construction and almost hooked a tugboat and plopped into the water. The flooding was mild, and all passengers and crew were alive. Passengers on a flight en route from New York to Seattle had to deal with an emergency flooding on the Hudson River after an Airbus A320 was attacked by a flock of gray geese. Less than a minute after takeoff, the plane staggered and passengers saw a flame burst from the engines. The geese were roasted in the engine and put them out of commission. The aircraft commander informed the dispatcher of a collision with a flock of birds and transmitted a distress signal. Seconds later, it became clear that he would not be able to keep the plane in the air and reach the runway. Risky, but the only way to save the crew and 150 passengers was landing in the Hudson River. The pilot turned the plane from north to south and made a plan to land in the river, but had to navigate to not hit cargo ferries or the Washington Bridge, and was able to splash down opposite the busy 42nd Manhattan Street. Frightened, but lively passengers climbed on the wings of the plane. Air industry professionals called the incident the miracle on the Hudson. You can ride on the fastest roller coaster in the world in the Ferrari World Abu Dhabi Amusement Park at a speed of 150 miles per hour. But this Boeing 737 with its passengers had to descend from a height of 24,000 feet in an airplane without a roof and with gale force winds in their face at speeds of 330 miles per hour. A short flight between the cities of the Hawaiian islands of Hilo and Honolulu should have taken only 35 minutes. But at 23 minutes into the flight, when the airliner gained the necessary height, explosive decompression occurred. The cockpit door and the roof over the first 6 rows was simply demolished. Passengers were in the open air at a temperature of minus 113 degrees Fahrenheit. They had not had time yet to unfasten their seatbelts. This saved their lives. The aircraft pilot began the emergency descent to the recommended 10,000 feet when decompressing the cabin at speeds of more than 300 miles per hour. He was about to slow down to 242 miles per hour to head to the reserve airport on Maui Island, but the left engine failed when approaching. Unfortunately, 11 minutes after the incident in the sky, the commander landed the plane on one right engine. Unfortunately, during the damage to the fuselage, a stewardess was thrown overboard. And in the memory of the stewardess at the airport, a blooming garden was laid out. A plane heading from Istanbul to Cyprus collided with strong wind and hail. At 5,000 feet, the nose was torn down. The hail was the size of a baseball and also damaged the navigation system. The windows of the cockpit were covered with such a dense network of cracks that they had to look into the side windows when the plane landed. As a result, the pilots completely lost the opportunity to look forward. The first pilot decided to return. When landing, he slightly tipped the plane so that he could see a strip through the side window. Also, the air traffic controllers and other crew members worked clearly. As a result, the plane with 121 passengers and 6 crew members successfully landed. In Kazakhstan at the International Airport, the Fokker 100 aircraft could safely make an emergency landing without front landing gear, while none of the passengers and crew with a total of 120 people were injured. The cause of the emergency was a malfunction in the mechanism of the front chassis. The aircraft pilot had to land it without the front landing gear, which is quite important when landing the aircraft. The front pillar did not fully exit the hatch, so they could not rely on it at all when landing. After touching the ground, the plane and the nose rattled on the concrete strip for hundreds of feet more. From strong friction, sparks and black smoke flew up. Fortunately, the plane did not catch fire. Surprisingly, after this landing, the damage to the aircraft body was minimal. And that's all for today. If you have any fascinating flight stories, share them in the comments. And if you think the pilots are the real heroes and pros, put like. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.